Today we are here with Zach Cupples for this episode of Bro Research Radio. And Zach, we've spent the last 5 days with you kind of hashing out movement in terms of, in your world of I don't know if that's completely true, but the clinician's world of physical therapy. And kind of Ryan and I are obviously meatheads. And so we see this stuff and we immediately think how screwed up we are. But then we also want to protect how screwed up we are. So we think of like cognitive dissonance. We think of ways, I don't know where that really applies to us. And so I loved in the beginning of your talk how you said, hey, just forget everything you know and just come at this with an open mind. And I think the best place for us to start is really this idea that most people are deadlifting twice. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of, I myself, I know I've learned probably to squat in a way that's not really a squat. And now I've loaded that pattern. Ryan and I both, the majority of people, if you Google image squat, you're going to come up with something that's probably not a squat. So you want to explain that to people, like what that is?
Yeah. So we have to delineate how are we defining a squat versus a deadlift. And for me, the difference between those two is what's going on mechanically at the pelvis, one, and two, what direction the body's going to travel, or really the pelvis is going to travel as you're performing that action. So in a hinge or a deadlift, you ideally want to shoot the hips backward. And if we look at the pelvic mechanics, that would involve the sacrum nutating or tipping forward, because as the sacrum tips forward, then the rest of the pelvis, as a consequence, has to move backward or posteriorly. With a squat, you have the opposite going on. The sacrum should counternutate, or it should tip backward. As the sacrum tips backward, then the pelvis, as a consequence, has to travel straight up and down, because that's the only option that's available. You can't shoot the pelvis incredibly forward, assuming that you're taking into account that you've stacked the rest of the thorax above the pelvis.
What do you mean by stacking the pelvis on top of the thorax on top of the pelvis? Like, can you explain that for people that haven't really been exposed to that?
Yeah, so if you can think of your rib cage, your abdomen, and your pelvis as a Coke can. Mm-hmm. If I want to pressurize that Coke can or prevent it from getting crushed, I'm going to increase pressure in all directions. And the way that would happen is if it's stacked. If I put a small dent in the can or I let out some of the pressure on top, then I'm able to crush the can.
Gotcha.
So most people, or a lot of people, when we are talking about compensatory mechanics, essentially have a dent in the can. So then they're not pressurizing their Coke can in all directions.
So they can still get some pressure, because you'll see that often, right? You'll see like that's the Valsalva maneuver. Mm-hmm. And lots of people are, I mean, I think by definition, really the Valsalva maneuver is creating intra-abdominal pressure. Yes. And I think when people think of that, they're thinking belly, mm-hmm. right? And so how does it differ from that?
So in that case, two things. One, if I'm doing just a belly breath, I'm not going to get multi-directional expansion of the abdomen and the pelvis. Mm-hmm. So then, from a loading perspective, I'm probably overloading certain tissues in one direction. In the case of if I'm belly breathing, the backside is more compressed, so I'm getting more concentric loading of the backside. The abdominal muscles and the viscera would be more stretched on the front side. So now I'm having too much eccentric loading on that side. So that's
the hard arch cue.
That's the hard arch cue. And that's not necessarily desirable, because if I akin the same thing to a bicep curl, I can't curl efficiently if I start all the way from the bottom, nor can I curl efficiently if I start all the way from the top. The most efficient way to curl is in the middle. And that's going to load the tissues.
In terms of how much force you can develop.
Yeah, in terms of force production.
Got it. So how is it that people are able to, because, I mean, you see people squatting 1,000+ pounds like that. Mm-hmm. So how did they develop the ability to do that if you're proposing that this is not optimal?
They're probably overloading passive tissues, or they've developed compensatory strategies in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes too, especially if I'm talking about power lifters, getting in that extreme arch position is going to limit depth. So
that's a huge
yeah.
issue.
So it's efficient for them. So what do? Then they widen their stance.
Yeah.
So then they don't have to go as far. They can rely more on passive elements and a little bit of stress shortening cycle to get out of the bottom.
And you'll see that powerlifters all the time. Like, I mean, that might be, I think initially with powerlifting, if you go back to like the big equipped days where they were using a squat suit, one of the reasons why you just widen your stance is like simply you're just going to stretch that squat suit out. But you'll see people carry that over into raw powerlifting as well. And probably the reason for that more so is because they can't actually hit depth. There's not a certain amount. I mean, for those who like are not into powerlifting, like in most federations or in all federations, there's a certain depth that you need to hit. But it's not necessarily that you're moving your legs as far. It's just that you're getting your hip crease underneath your knee is typically the acceptable depth. And by widening your stance, you don't actually have to move as far, right? So I think that the argument for a lot of people is, well, I'm doing like if I abduct my femurs and I arch my back, like I can still move as much weight. I can still get to depth, but you're kind of cheating it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, it's gaming the system essentially. But you have to ask what's your goal. If your goal is to move the most weight humanly possible, you probably want to take the most efficient route of getting there, you know, irrespective of what adaptations you're trying to drive. Just like with a bench press. It's much more efficient to bench if I create a huge arch because the bar path is now lower versus if I am flat benching and I'm not depressing my scaps so they're flat and creating that stable platform. I think it's the same principle. I think one thing too that we're missing with when we do that extreme arch is in a perfect world, you want to balance between not just intra-abdominal pressure, but also intra-thoracic pressure as well.
And that's probably a term that most people haven't really heard of before.
Yeah, no one talks about intra-thoracic pressure. And part of the reason, aside from force production, you want intra-abdominal pressure, you also want that to protect the spine. But rarely do we think about getting force production up in the upper thoracic region and spinal protection. Ideally,
so
if I'm
getting air into the anterior and posterior 360,
it should mirror the abdomen and
the entire cavity.
Yeah, and under normal respiratory mechanics, if you look at some of the research by Detroyer, you should see somewhat of a balanced ratio between pressure increasing in those areas as you breathe in and as you breathe out, or pressure should be the same. You lose that if you create this excessive arch because now I can't fill the upper back as effectively.
And you probably lose it passively. Like you're probably going to make these compensations. So even in your everyday life, you can't, like most people that we see in the weight room, you're going to be anterior and posteriorly compressed.
Yeah, more often than not. And that's as a mean to create some semblance of stability in the thorax. So when I am overly stressed, whether that's something with weights or whatever, the safe bet, especially if we're talking in the core region or the axial skeleton region, is to reduce movement options. So how can I reduce movement options? I can compress the hell out of the upper thorax.
So that may be a good idea. So I always come back to this idea that strength is, you know, it's task specific, it's rep range specific, it's range of motion specific, it's barbell specific. It's like machine's not going to necessarily translate to a barbell. So if your sport is powerlifting, then these compensatory mechanisms are probably advantageous for you because that's what you care about. But I think where we get lost is most people aren't powerlifters, right? And so that's how we're teaching the general population to squat with this, you know, with this pelvis that's probably not, you're just teaching a hinge twice essentially. And then I always come back to body composition is most people that come to the gym are probably after body composition changes. They don't really care how much weight they lift unless they fall in love with some exercise and then Olympic weightlifting or powerlifting or something like that. But it seems like there's a lot of, one of the big gaps in the industry right now that I feel like is we have these tried and true exercises that we think work these muscle groups, but if you squat like that, you're probably not overloading the muscles that you're trying to overload. Correct?
It's kind of funny if you look at, especially a lot of the drug tested powerlifters, their legs are very unimpressive from a hypertrophy perspective. Like but their backs are generally pretty big. Their erectors are usually like you could grab them with your hand. it might be something to that.
Yeah.
So you think they're essentially hinging, and then once their hips run out of room, then they're going to lumbar flex to get
to depth in a deadlift.
And that's
so they're just really good at
and a squat for that matter. Yeah, because it's the same movement.
So they're just getting really good at lumbar flexion.
Yes. And then they can use the lumbar to lift the weight up.
And I would argue, a lot of times you'll see people that can actually maintain that nutation the entire way through the squat. Mm-hmm. And they're taught to do the most obvious, simple answer is if you're looking at it, like your butt keeps tucking under when you squat. Don't do that. Arch harder.
Butt wink.
Right. So we're seeing butt wink. So the cue is commonly chest up more, stick your ass out more, maintain that tension. And that does work when you look at it. Like they are often able to achieve that. But maybe it's coming at a cost. So can you kind of explain like what's going on at the level of the pelvis, and probably we'll have to talk about the thorax if we're talking about the pelvis, like what's going on, because essentially what you're saying is if we're nutating the sacrum, so we're bringing the pelvis back under, we're counter nutating the sacrum
during a squat
or before you begin the descent on a squat. How is that allowing you to not counter nutate at the bottom?
It has to depend on where you're placing the implement, the weight. Okay. So, for example, if I do anything anteriorly loaded, that's going to close off structures on the front because I'm going to have some degree of muscular contraction concentrically to hold the weight up. I don't have anything blocking me on the backside posteriorly. So the mechanics of the thorax should match the mechanics at the sacrum. We have normal curves in the sense that the cervical spine should be lordotic, the thoracic spine should be kyphotic, the lumbar spine should be lordotic, and then the sacrum should be kyphotic. So I have a matching curves at the sacrum and the thorax. So if I use an activity or an exercise that allows for more kyphosis to develop or me to expand posteriorly by blocking the front, allowing the back to open up, I should have the same thing happen at the sacrum. Now, what type of squat variation do you commonly see the butt wink on, would you say?
Back squat.
Back squat. On the back squat, yeah.
So where's the bar on the back squat?
It's behind you.
It's behind you. So based on the bar being there,
elbows are driving you more thoracic.
And you're pulling the scaps closer together. You're more retraction.
Yeah.
So the curve is going to be less. You're going to have a reduction of thoracic kyphosis. So if I have a reduction of the kyphosis, then I'm going to have some degree of nutation. So perhaps some degree of butt wink is okay in that activity, and some degree of nutation in driving the hips posteriorly is okay.
So you're saying that you would say like if someone's squatting 500 pounds and you're seeing a butt wink, you wouldn't necessarily be worried about that in terms of like shear forces on the spine?
Depends on how soon it happens. And depends on, are they managing the stacking, which we talked about earlier, of the thorax over the rib cage. So that way I can have somewhat of a match between intrathoracic and intra-abdominal pressure.
Because nutation doesn't necessarily mean that we're losing that stacking, correct? Because if we're going to go into a hinge pattern, we still want to maintain that stacking. We're just taking everything forward. So
you're moving the cavity or the core, which I call the ventral cavity in seminar, thorax, abdomen, and pelvis. You're moving the whole thing posteriorly. And so if I need to achieve depth on a squat and I'm back squatting while I'm already nutated, I'm going to drop down to some degree, not to the extent that I might be able to if I anteriorly load. Well, eventually, because you're starting from a nutated orientation, if you're going straight down, you have to counter nutate. And that's where the butt wink comes in.
Gotcha.
How soon that happens, that's when it becomes a problem. If the butt wink happens very early in the squat and I'm seeing a huge belly, all the viscera is moving anteriorly, that's probably a problem.
So the butt wink probably is not going to happen if not as soon if you're able to stack things, regardless of the nutation that you have with your pelvis. So that's big, because I think that when people hear us talk about this stuff, like they might think like they have to throw out certain exercises. All we're saying is that like they may not be optimal for your goal. So if you're going, because I think about this as a, very recreational power lifter. It's not very strong, but I like to get on a platform with a singlet on every now and then because I like to wear as little clothing as I can in public.
Yeah.
And, so I would like to continue to compete in powerlifting. I'd like to have some type of decent squat, right? So I'm thinking as I go through this stuff, well, shit, like I can't back squat anymore. But that's not necessarily what you're saying. Is like there's going to be some level of deviation that you might have, or maybe not even really. Maybe you just have to accept the fact that like your low bar squat, it's probably not really a squat. It's more of a hinge, but you can do it in a healthy way if you start to think about some of these things. So I'm just curious, like if you,
well, I would say like I don't know that it's why do we throw in the word health? Like why does that matter?
Yeah, that shouldn't be your first thought. But I think that because I think you can go the other way too. Like I don't think we should be thinking of extreme sport like that as being healthy, but I think we want to think of it as being less unhealthy,
less
dangerous, right? So how do I make it where I'm accepting that there obviously is a risk? Putting 550 on my back, like something bad could happen. Absolutely, I want that, or it's not going to be fun. But there's probably a way that I can do things that aren't going to be, as risky, and that I'm able to extend. And even like you're saying, like you're able to get all of this pressure circumferentially, and now you might even be stronger if you're able to manage those things better.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't worked with many powerlifters, but Lucy Hendricks has worked with quite a few, and we collaborate a lot together. And she's had powerlifters do a lot of this stuff, change the mechanics in terms of how they're squatting, and they're able to move the same way, and it's just elite level people with narrower depth. And still get
cool.
Narrower feet.
Yeah, narrower feet.
Which is probably going to lend itself to a more vertical squat.
Yes.
That what we're looking for, a more squatty squat.
Yeah. And even if we're not talking health, like the way you get good at powerlifting is being able to train more.
Yeah, what screws up a powerlifter? It's an injury.
It's an injury. That's the biggest thing. Yeah.
So if we can mitigate injuries in training, then that's probably a worthwhile thing.
And that's probably a good segue to go into like something that we never talk about on this podcast, which is hypertrophy. People have listened to us talk, and you probably haven't heard that word before, but hypertrophy means growth, and we usually talk about skeletal muscle. So if you've heard of hypertrophy, Zach, could you tell us how that might relate to hypertrophy training? Like how can fixing some of this stuff benefit you potentially?
Yeah. Well, a wise man once told me that the two keys to hypertrophy are mechanical tension and metabolic stress. And so let's talk about the tension portion.
Metabolic stress being a backdoor pathway to mechanical tension.
Yes, because you would induce a lot of the metabolites that would. You're more versed in that than I am. So
basically, it's got to suck.
Yes. So I think a big key to establishing some of that mechanical tension is being able to utilize the range of motion of the tissues throughout their full range. For example, let's use the squat since we've been talking about that. I'm probably going to get better mechanical tension if I go a lower depth than if I do high depth squatting. Because I spend more time.
Okay.
Let's say we have speed as this constant, all that stuff. Let's say we're using the same tempo, all that. I would think from a hypertrophy perspective,
full range of motion training generally outperforms partial range of motion training, but you could argue that in terms of the squat, you have different muscles have different leverage points during that movement, right? So like in the north, like how you want us to squat, I think we're going to get a lot more quad versus
and you can feel it.
100%.
Yeah.
Whereas I think if someone's doing that prototypical more hinged squat, they're going to get adductors and lumbar. I don't really, those are going to be the primary movers there. So I would say like the big thing that I'm seeing is you're getting mechanical tension possibly, and that's what they did this 8-week longitudinal study where they looked at, muscle growth from squatting, and like the adductors and the glutes were the ones that got the most hypertrophy. And that's probably because of, I would guess, how they were squatting, because they're getting hip extension from the glutes at the top, and then their adductors are the limiter, and the bottom, because it's a linear ascending, it's a linear, it's an ascending linear strength curve, so your hardest point is in the bottom. But you can make the argument that if you just did partial rep training with the squat that you're talking about, loaded up with bands or something accommodated, you could just viciously screw up your quad.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing like supported body weight squats, like half range of motion, like that shit was tearing us up. Like it was, and you know, granted, like it's new, you know, it's a different movement. It's completely different from what we've been doing. But there's something going on there.
Well, I did the hack squat yesterday, and so one of the cool things to me is you watch Johnner's squat, and so Johnner's never learned. He doesn't know, like, so he's never learned any kind of the bad patterns. So he basically just front squatted and safety bar squatted, and like he didn't touch a back squat for I think almost a year and a half, like a year and a few months. And so his mechanics, he has the knees like I don't, just because of how we taught him, he's never learned those patterns and he's never overloaded them. So his pelvis and his knees kind of move together, and he's got a really nice looking squat. And then some of that might be just anthropometrics, but I think a lot of it is just that's the movement pattern that he's trained. And we did the hack squat with a reach and then really focusing on tucking that pelvis. And I think I had 245s on, and I was like lit after like 7 reps.
Sled's 100 pounds.
Yes, Sled's 100 pounds.
At least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were doing, this morning, myself, Ryan Whitehead, and Jack, and Jess. And I mean, we had a safety squat with 135 pounds with the feet elevated. And I mean, most people couldn't keep the stacked position and go full depth, but every one of them said quads were smoked. Now, as you get better at manipulating your body into this position, could you smoke your quads even further by keeping that while attaining an even greater depth?
More weight.
I mean, I would think yes. Yeah.
I don't see why not.
Yeah.
Like it's in my mind, it's like I'm trying to play with, because I have a big ego. Like I got to squat. Like I got to pull some heavy weight. Like I got to do that stuff, or I'm just going to lose my mind, right? But I'm almost looking at it like it's may just be a different lift for people. Like it's just an accessory exercise, if you want to call it that, as we kind of transition to making that our more.
Well, I don't know that it ever makes it. See, that's the thing, is like I don't know if it ever makes it to your main. Maybe if you're a power lifter, it probably never makes it to your main lift. Right?
But it can probably get a little bit better. Yeah. Right. But it's like it's going to do a different thing. It's like throwing it. It's like if you've just been bench pressing your whole life for triceps, and now you're doing tricep extensions. That's kind of what it feels like to me. It's like, oh, this is true isolation work for our quads. Not exactly, but it's
a compound movement that actually targets the quads.
Yeah. So it's a very different thing, and I think like what that does for just injury prevention over time, and just movement variance, and being able to present different patterns. Like I think that is longevity at the very least. Like, but I think there's probably also some money there for hypertrophy.
Well, yeah, I would think so. I also think too, if we're talking ego, but not just ego, but like your main lift, in many cases, you're trying to output as much as you possibly can. So there's neurological adaptations that go along with that, so on and so forth, and alterations in bone density, among other things. If you can't load as effectively with some of these lifts, maybe it's not your main. But maybe if we went back to, I don't know, when you started lifting 8 or 9 years old, and we taught you some of these moves, or taught you squatting in this way, would it be your main lift? Yeah, and I don't know what the answer is, because now it's like I'm trying to break you movement patterns that both of you are currently using. And not only that, but you've also undergone tissue adaptation that favors you doing certain things more so than others, like just based on the mass that you've acquired.
I mean, how many reps?
Yeah.
Well, Ben, you kind of just brought up with John, like you mentioned arthrometrics, and like I think that there's I've heard a lot of talk about people saying like, well, I'll never be able to squat that way because of my hips or this time, because I'm whatever, I'm from France or something. So is that a real thing? Like what's your argument to that? Like how much does that matter?
Or are we talking like antiversion, retroversion?
Yeah, just like your structure in general. I mean, you just talked about like I've had some structural changes that have taken place through training, or just that someone's like hips are designed
Yeah, they'll
or
show you an
whatever.
X-ray of their hips or whatever.
Like, I can't squat the full depth. Like, look at how much, like, I have very little space. Like, what's kind of your response to that? Like, you think everyone has that archetype kind of squat, or like, what do you? How easy are people able to get into this stuff?
I think that the people who have structural adaptations, at least with the populations I see, and I see some screwed up pups, is very rare. I can think of one person right now on my schedule who has like a legit structural adaptation where he probably has OA and is retroverted in the hips.
Osteoarthritis.
Yeah, osteoarthritis. So he's had bony adaptation happen that has created significant limitations in his motion. But he has about 60 degrees of hip flexion available. When he stands up from a chair, he has to cross his legs underneath him and gets up on the outsides of his feet.
So
I mean,
that's a lot different than
like a
meathead that just
yes,
his feet out when he walks.
Yes.
Yeah.
So no matter what I do with him, I'm lucky to be getting just a few degrees in range of motion. And it's probably his ultimate fixes. It's a surgical procedure. Like, that's an extreme. I don't see people like that who maybe have just 10 degrees of hip internal rotation and they have to go with a wide stance. A lot of times, especially if you're younger, that can be altered and adjusted by manipulating the range of motion that you have available in the hips through some of the stuff that we learned in the seminar. Because if you can't stack your rib cage atop your pelvis, that's going to reduce movement options at the pelvis. Well, there's I forget the name of the author. I think the study was done in 2014. And it was on people with hip impingement, and it was a 3-dimensional model, and they dumped the pelvis into anterior tilt. And that stole hip internal rotation range of motion.
Creating more impingement.
And it stole other ranges as well. But the big thing was, if I anteriorly tilt the pelvis, there's a loss of hip internal rotation. So
and a compensatory external rotation of the femur.
Yes. In this population. So if I can get the pelvis to get underneath me, perhaps that allows for greater movement options available at the hips. Well, that's going to change where you set up stance-wise for your squat. That's going to change a lot of different things. And so I think it would behoove most people to see if they can restore as much movement as possible in some of these regions, and then try to recreate the positions that we would teach at lower intensity activities under load and see what happens. And I think more often than not, you can probably get some changes in range of motion. Where
we saw that all week.
Yeah, we saw that all week, and we're adaptable creatures. And it's just learning a different skill.
So what does that look like starting from the beginning? So say like the ultimate goal is to get someone into you have the ability to counter nutate their sacrum, to be able to drop into this linear squat. Squat. So like where do you start with that? I mean, obviously everyone's a little bit different, but you mentioned the stacking thing. Like
also like how you do see people who have this squat, and you mentioned that like sometimes you'll see some lifters, normally Asian lifters, who do have this type of boom, straight up and down squat for like 600 pounds. And you've mentioned that they are cheating. So how are they cheating?
So the way that they're cheating is they are either externally rotating the femurs to a slight degree to allow them to actually do the nutation to get down. So you'll see with some people like this.
So their pelvis still isn't stacked.
Yeah. Okay. And we saw that with the example that I gave in the seminar of Lucy. Like she can get really, really low because she's got a crazy amount of hip flexion available. So what someone ends up doing is they shoot their hips back until they can get to that point where they can acquire that last bit of hip flexion, and then they sit down. You'll see that. Sometimes what you'll see as well is they may just externally rotate at the tibias to, again, widen the base of support to allow them to get down.
I don't know anyone who does that.
Tibial torsion? You don't have that.
I don't know anyone who does that.
Yeah.
Never
So,
that.
It's fucking...
Tibias literally
like
go two different directions.
So you see,
and it's still going.
We're still recording.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, commercial break there.
So we get.
Yeah, I think so.
Seems like it says, and yes.
The mic seems to be doing the thing. I can edit that out.
All right. So you either see a compensatory rotation either at the femurs or at the tibia into external rotation, which allows them to clear a little bit of space in the pelvis to shoot the hips back. And that's how they achieve the depth. Whereas if you look at indigenous populations or aborigines, like just go to Google Images and check out some of their squats. You see a drastic difference in terms of how the spine looks, and that's really your tell. As I counter nutate the sacrum, the rest of the spine should round.
But bro, that's butt link. That's bad.
But I want a neutral spine.
What's neutral?
Yeah. This.
And can you measure that?
So that's what people want to see, this straight line on squat. They want to see this straight line on the deadlift. But really, if you're squatting, your posterior thoracic should be expanded. You should be a little bit
inferiorly loaded.
Less so if you have a bar.
Less so if you have a bar.
Yeah, but even still, though, it's. I think the perception of what is good and or healthy for your spine, like. I mean, there's still a lot of people that are talking about like tying your shoelaces in a hip hinge. You know, so, like I think that the perception needs to change of just what is good, just in general, what your back is supposed to be able to do, and then carry that over to lifting, right?
Yeah. Well, I think there was an inherent fear for many years that if you flex the spine under load, that you're going to have a disc shoot out the backside.
I thought it was that there was a donut inside you that was going to explode or something.
Yeah, just pancake batter.
That's what I was thinking. So you don't want pancake batter inside your body.
No. So, but here's the problem. There's I think this was in Journal Strength Conditioning Research 2010. As soon as you put a load on your back, your lumbar spine becomes kyphotic, so it flexes as soon as the load's on your back.
But shouldn't that blow out every disc in your back immediately then, right?
I mean,
with that logic.
You would think so, yeah.
Maybe that logic is a little outdated.
How many blown out discs do you think we have?
Altogether? Yeah. At least one spine's worth, right? At least between the two of us. Maybe not Zach. He's smarter than us.
Well, but if you play the odds, chances are
you probably do.
Probably all three of us have.
Oh, yeah. You're running.
Yeah.
So
that was not good.
So yeah, the perception probably needs to change a little because I think at least I know when I first got into this industry, which was 9 years ago, like, and prior to that, I was just learning how to lift from 10 years old on. Like, if I saw like a picture of one of those like aborigines, the way they're squatting, I'd be like, oh shit, like they're gonna blow their back out. and like legitimately, like that's really what I thought. Like, and that's kind of so. I think it's like, I'll plug your stuff for you. Like, I think you need to go to the course. Like, I think you need to understand like all of this stuff from the bottom up, and then it makes a lot of sense the way that you lay it out. How would you like? We did all this stuff over this past week, and a lot of it was kind of lower level stuff that eventually built up into the higher level, like we're talking about squatting, deadlifting, pressing. So where does it all begin for you? Because it seems like you have a formula and you adjust it based off the individual, but there is a beginning to this. So where does it kind of start and beginning to manage all of these things that we're talking about? Yeah.
So for me, my bias, most of the people who I work with, I'll say like 80% is a pain population. So in a rehab setting. So that's where I catch people. I have some clients who I train online as well. So that's a little bit different, but I try to actually start people in a similar spot. I want to teach, my goal in my head is I need to teach this person to be able to stack the rib cage top the pelvis, and I need to pick whatever drill that I can give that person to do on their own without my supervision to be able to accomplish that. And then it's a matter of progressing intensity. So for example, one of the first moves that we went over is like a 90-90 position or a wall position or a Lewitt position, as it is in the research, where your hips and knees are at a 90-degree angle and you're working on lifting the hips up while doing some breathing mechanics. Yeah, on the ground, on your back, or on your side. That position, if I go upright, is a parallel squat. So you could reason to believe that you could probably start someone anywhere. That's just the most regress version of that's available. So,
and would you say that most weightlifters cannot segmentally kind of posterior shift through on their spine? Most they just move all together.
That not just lifters, but probably everyone. I mean, and people in pain as well. If you look at the research on movement variability, and what that is how much difference do I have in my motions, even if I'm performing the same motion. So if you perform 10 squats, each squat should be subtly different, and that's been a marker of health. When you are in pain or you've sustained an injury, or if things are getting challenging, you generally reduce your movement variability or you reduce your options available. If I'm under threat, I do not want to explore. I want to go with what's efficient and what works, because I don't know what my next.
So that could be, that could be anybody. Gen Bob, giant lifters, it's just a generalized response.
Yeah. So you could really start someone anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
If you were my client, we might just do what we did with your front squat, and I don't even have to get you on the ground unless we find a rate limiting step, or if we find like you need this movement to be able to accomplish your hypertrophy goals.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can't do it right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to regress you to something where that's going to mimic what we're trying to achieve on the weight room floor.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can't split squat, or maybe you're not getting as much as you want out of your split squat, I could do some type of variation either on hands and knees, or I could do something on your back, or in fact, like the move that I gave you when I worked with you, that side lying stride, where you have the top leg is fully extended and then the bottom leg's bent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the top of a step up, or that's the bottom of a step up.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing like a sprinter variation, or if you were to do sprinting for some reason, it's the exact same position. It's just, I need you to control or put your body into a certain orientation in order to maximize the movement available and to restore length tension relationships, or give you options to have multiple length tension relationships to be able to achieve the adaptation that you want. And so for you, that's gains mode. For a lot of my people, that's getting out of pain, because if they have options available, then you don't have tissues getting overloaded and developing ischemia where there's loss of blood flow and problems ensue.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be different for, if I have a power athlete, well, if I'm talking stretch shortening cycle, I need to be able to take people through the full eccentric, concentric, not full, but at least be able to get into an eccentric, concentric orientation to elicit the stretch shortening cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So the concept's the same, and I would say you need to, wherever you're starting with someone, you need to pick the move that they can execute the stack effectively, and then progress it from there.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually getting to stuff that you both already do.
Which is, I think, the biggest takeaway that we've both had is, all right, so we have, maybe we take our licks on these big boy lifts, because for us, our ego is probably never going to be able to put those down. We've been doing them for decades. And so bench pressing, deadlift, I've let go of the deadlift. Like, I know you haven't. It's your best lift.
I never could.
Yeah, I don't deadlift.
And then like working on letting go of the squat. I don't know that I'll ever let go of the bench press. I'm good at it, but not really. But this idea that, all right, so we are going to move this way. Maybe we can move a little bit less poorly, but there's no reason to carry that over into everything that we do. Like, you can maintain a stacked pelvis on a stacked pelvis with a stacked thoracic spine, and you can do tricep extensions, or you can do lat pull downs, and it's amazing how much more stuff you can feel. Like, you can get abs on every exercise. And so a lot of your accessory work, or what I would think is probably the primary hypertrophy response for a lot of us, you can turn almost into repositioning drills if you understand these principles. And I think if you understand the principles, you can come up with a lot of your own stuff.
Yeah, and especially if, for you two muscle bound bros, you're probably going to need more intensity to be able to restore the movement options, just based on some of the fluid dynamics that we talked about in the joints. If I have the ability to contract a muscle to a really high degree, and I can't go into the opposite direction,
you're going to need some force.
You're going to need some force production to be able to move the fluid the other way to restore the movement.
So that's cool, because I think that the people that are savvy to this kind of stuff, you see them almost take like a left turn with their training, where it's they used to train. That drives both of us fucking bonkers. Like, and I don't say that I was like fully there, and I don't think Ben ever really was.
Well,
but
I mean, I've seen people like all of a sudden they're goblet squatting Like
they're strong as shit.
They could squat 315 for 10, and then all of a sudden they're goblet squatting as their main lift.
Yeah, there's like this fear involved, and they're just like, So what you're saying is it not only does it probably not need to be that way, but those people probably won't even get the full effect out of what they're trying to do because they need force, they need stress to be able to push things in the other direction. Is that accurate?
Yeah. It's on an individual basis, though. It's like, for you today, when you were front squatting, you were able to get yourself into that position, and you were able to get the stuff that we were trying to do. But what if you couldn't do that? Then I got to give you something else.
Yeah, but is loading that going to be that bad? He's been doing that for a really long time.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, it's not. It could be, but it could not be too.
Yeah, you take
what's bad?
Yeah. I mean, like, it's so hard to say, because we look at this stuff and we're like, oh shit, like you're gonna blow your back out, like you're doing that, like. But it's like we don't know, like And I can tell you, like I used to have a lot of back pain, like I've had a lot of issues. So some of the stuff that I've done, even though it's not perfect, has made things better. And I think Ben probably the same case. Like we've both had injuries and shit. So we're still, as we've learned this week, we're still not doing everything perfectly, optimally, whatever you want to call it. But like you have to take that risk sometimes. But I think that's a really big point that I really would like to make sure that people take away from this, that have been exposed to your type of stuff and been exposed to certain acronyms and I think
safetyism.
The safety is like, but it's not even like you actually need a threat to have change, especially if you put so much threat into your body that it's shifted you into this pattern that you're in now. Like you're gonna need some stress.
Well, and I think that would probably align more with the research than the stuff that I do from an injury prevention perspective. I mean, one of the biggest risk factors for injury that would make you healthy is your ability to produce force.
Yeah.
And there's not much research showing the stuff that I do or having full range of motion available being the same thing. So
training volume. Like training volume is protective against injury risk. Like if you can maintain a high training volume, it's protective.
Yeah. Whereas we don't necessarily have that data on, can you achieve a full squat? Do you have all of the
Man, I mean, I would love to see some stuff like, the squat studies, like what's going on in this type of a squat compared to a traditional squat.
That's why I think like the thorax and stuff with the mind motion, like looking at EMG patterns, or not that EMG is
not perfect,
but you might be able to pick something up in that, like, hey, when people normally squat, they get this, or even, and then you can, because a lot of this stuff, I think where the evidence-based fitness community, and I don't want to be evidence limited, where the evidence-based fitness community, like a lot of these tests that people, they kind of look gimmicky. Like you can move them around and like, oh, this looks better. Like, is it really better? And so that's why I kind of, as a scientist, I want to know, like, objectively, these tests that you, and I'll throw out acronyms, I don't really care. Like, if PRI has these objective tests, are they really objective? Like, no, they're a subjective test. Like, you're moving it. And so I think adding some objectivity to this from a research standpoint could be really, really helpful to those people that are maybe they're always going to be contrarian. I know I'm very contrarian in some ways, but there's the coach that has been coaching the RDL with cervical extension, max amount of stretch for that entire motion. And they're using that as a primary hamstring exercise. But once your hips stop moving posteriorly, you're no longer getting hamstring, because a hamstring is a hip extension muscle. So, like, you're just getting lumbar flexion.
And even if that isn't bad, like, it's not good either. Like, it's not any better. Like, you ran out of hamstring. Like, so, like, it's not that you're not, like, you're still going to build muscle with that exercise.
They're going to feel more because they're eccentrically loading, and eccentrically loading is going to, lead to more pain.
Yeah, you're going to have more soreness. Yeah. So it's like, that's the other thing too, is because people will argue like, well, nobody does shit this way, really. I mean, like the biggest guys just crush. Like, they're not thinking about this stuff, but they're also generally sidelined by injuries often. Like, this just overuse stuff, right? Like, so this could be I think this could be a longevity thing. I think there's also just an ability to, like I said, it's kind of like different exercises. Like, it's just fibers that you probably haven't hit before. Like, just with that squat, like I'm feeling like I generally, as shitty as my squats look, I actually generally feel a lot in my quads. But that was like a completely different feeling, the way that we were squatting. Just like it's very like more like proximal, like quad, like shit like I don't really usually feel.
From a moxie standpoint, or from like a blood flow standpoint, I think we might, when we squat, we might just be feeling blood go to that region instead of that's.
So it's not actually mechanical tension.
That's my hunch,
dude. That's interesting. Yeah. So it's not
because you're just shunting stuff around.
Yeah, because I tell you, like, I'll feel it, and I'll have people say that they feel their quads in those squats, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, it looks like a lot of back, but if you're telling me you don't feel your back and you feel quads, like. So that's a really, because you are moving that tissue, like you're bending your knee, like there's something going on there.
Yeah. You're including something. You're including a lot of something.
So maybe it's just, if we talk about mechanical tension as kind of being like a backdoor way to, metabolic stress is a backdoor way to mechanical tension.
But I don't think you're metabolically stressing, overloading the quads.
Yeah, probably
from what I've seen.
Yeah, that's a really interesting
and definitely not the rectus. Definitely not the 2-joint quad. No, you're not doing that one. You're not doing that with a squat anyways. Most likely.
Yeah. I mean, that could be like, that's just kind of, we're both kind of committed to making these changes a little bit with their training. So it'd be cool to see what kind of changes we get.
My shorts don't fit already, so that'll be. My wife will be real happy.
I mean, I don't really wear clothing that fits me anyway, so that's not really have anything to do with my muscle. But hopefully they get tighter.
Anything else we like? I'm trying to think of, because this stuff is so foreign to a lot of people, and it's so foreign that it initiates a threat response. I know it did for me when I first saw this shit. I was like, what is this? Like, this is stupid. It's unloaded. But I think as I mean, yourself, Pat, Lucy, as you guys kind of bring this stuff more into the mainstream gym environment, it's looking less and less like physical therapy. And I think that's where people get hung up, is a lot of, like, I'm not, like, if you're a strength coach, you're not a physical therapist. And if you're a physical therapist, you're not a strength coach. But I think that we've talked about this, is like the lanes, like where is your lane end? Where does someone else's lane begin? How do you feel about that?
I think the concept of staying in your lane or having lanes is BS, because I think there's no two strength coaches who have the same skill set. I think there's no two PTs who have the same skill set. I think it really depends on, or I think we're all trying to get people to the same endpoint, which is we want people to be pursuing fitness in however they want to do that, to maximize whatever their goals are, whether that's health goals, whether that's performance goals. And really the difference between the three of us is we're all catching people at different places. You might catch someone who has gut issues or a messed up thyroid and whatever. You might catch someone who wants to get into bodybuilding because whatever they've been doing hasn't been working. And I might catch someone who's in pain. And that's just the starting point that we're bringing these people from. But we're all pushing them to the same thing. And where
I think we might be, but I don't think that's generally what happens in the industry. We're all trying to make people autonomous. Like, what do you want? I think the industry is trying to, like, they have their box. The majority of people have their box, and they're trying to shove everybody in their box, because that's easier to do. Because you have this is where I want to
protect your business too.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Which I think, you might make good money in the short term, but you're probably doing a lot of people wrong by that. And we're not developing that autonomy, like you said. We're not. I think we have to ask ourselves, what is this person's goal, and not have whatever our goals and our biases are attached to that. But if we can use our skill set to help them achieve that goal, I think that's worthwhile. And I think that's really what the industry should move towards.
Giving more people more skills.
More people, more skills. Yeah.
And I think you guys kind of got screwed on this deal. Like, I didn't go to college. Like, I was able to kind of enter this industry right out of high school. Like, I went to a pretend college for 4 months. Like, I spent like $8,000 on it. Like, and then I just started making money, and I started working with the same people that you guys work with, really.
Yeah.
So I can see like where someone would be pissed off, you know, a physical therapist that is very good at what he does. He's a freaking doctor, or someone who's a functional medicine doctor who has a PhD in nutrition. And, you know, you got some shithead 21-year-old like working with these clients and they're actually helping them. And like, that kind of sucks, you know, like I can see how that would be a little frustrating if you're someone who's like really tied to that degree. And like, and that's what I love about both of you guys is that like you want to help me because you want me to be better at helping other people. And it's like this whole thing of like, we're just trying to do good work, man. Like we're just trying to like make sure that people, it's not like this ego thing. Like maybe you went about it in a different way, but we've all worked hard to get to the knowledge that we have. And I think that it's just like, just remembering that people are coming to you to get them better. Like, and they're coming to me to get better. Like whatever it is, whatever that means. Like, I don't think that necessarily one person should only be able to touch one thing because that's what they went to school for and that's what they paid $100,000 for. You know, like it's because we're talking about humans. Like it's not really that cut and dry. That it's just like just because you went to the nutritionist means that they're going to be the one that helps you. You might not jive with that person, like for whatever reason. Like it's so I think just like pulling the ego out of it. And that's what you guys have both done really well. And that's it's pretty awesome for me to be able to learn from guys like you and to see that, set that example. Like I think that's what needs to be perpetuated throughout the industry.
Well, you got to be careful legally though. Like if you're in the States, even if you're in Costa Rica, like they have laws about this stuff as well. And I think that's where most of these laws are. You know, we talk about belief structures. These systems work because it's a shared belief structure. Like, what is the AMA? What is the Dietetics Association? These are, you know, governing bodies that have gone state to state, and now they have these rights because. You know, I should not be able to perform heart surgery. That's not something that I should be able to do. I don't have the credentials to do that, nor do I want to do that. And so that's the ideology of this is like, hey, you don't. That's why those things exist. That's why those letters after your name exist. And that's the danger to me is when it's really an error of omission. So like someone, if you're, I think why Zach and I both like working with you is you don't have you have an ego in the weight room, but from a learning standpoint, you don't think that you're not trying to handle everything. Neither am I, neither is Zach. Like we understand when, hey, this problem is above me or legally outside of what I can do. But the more stuff that you know, the more stuff that you know you don't know.
Exactly. You gotta identify things and go, whoa, yeah, I'm not touching this. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just the responsibility of everyone that you got to know enough. And
I think the more you know, the less dangerous you are. If you're not an asshole, if you're not an asshole, then you're less dangerous. The more you know. If you're an asshole, then you just start taking on everything, and you probably don't make good art.
Yeah.
You might make a lot of money, but you're not gonna make good art.
Yeah.
But I think if we can keep the ultimate goal as how can I best help this person, and you know what you're good at and what you're not good at, as long as you can keep that and have people to fill the gaps in terms of what you're not good at, or you fill those gaps yourself. I mean, like I'm interested in many different things. Like I would love to learn the skill set that you have. I think if we just keep that in mind and also encourage each other to maybe expand our skill sets, because Ben and I only have so much time to see people. And I'm sure there's a lot of, you know, if you've maxed out your hours of seeing people in your functional medicine realm, you probably want someone to refer to, and you're not just going to refer to anyone willy-nilly, you're going to refer to someone who's good at that craft. Same thing with me. Like there's some trainers out there who I would rather, assuming that the red flags have been ruled out, send someone who's in pain to them as opposed to the local PT. So I think we just have to keep that in mind when we're making these decisions to work with someone or not work with someone. That it's ultimately about what's in the client's best interest, and we need to put people in that client's lives that are going to carry that out accordingly.
And empower. I would also say empower them. Like a lot of us from like, how can I help this person? I think it's more like, how can I help this person help themselves?
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Because then I think our ultimate where we differ from the majority of the industry, and I'm pretty proud of this, is I want people not to need me. And I think all of us are the same, but people tend to stick around because, you know, they enjoy your mindset. They want to get your opinions. And so that's one thing that I really appreciate, even seeing how you work with me, seeing how you work with my wife, and like, hey, here's your recap email. Here's as detailed, as clarified of a recap as I can give you. And then if you need anything, just let me know. But if this works for you, you're not tied. Like, that could be it.
Mm-hmm.
They're not tied. Like, hey, I need to see you every 4 weeks for the next fucking year and a half. Like, it's like, it might be this simple fist, or it might, you need to see me more often.
Yeah. And I mean, it was cool working with you as well, seeing that same ideology.
You were an easy client. I just had to give you information and then you're fine.
Yeah.
Like,
well, except for the last couple months, I kind of, I don't know what the hell went on. I ate too much food.
That's all right. No, and so that's one of the, if we tie this back to kind of the theme of this, what we talk about majorly, which is hypertrophy, you have all your tenets. We have all these things that we know are really, really important. Where I see this in my model is this is potentially in that range of motion movement quality realm, where you might get more mechanical tension on different tissues and different angles, and that could potentially help you if you overload it. And overloading it might take a real big hit to your ego, because I think if you try to squat the same amount of weight that you've been squatting in this position, number one, you're just going to go back to the way you were doing it before. Yeah. And so that can be really, really difficult for people. But if you can kind of regress the movement and probably make it a different movement in the beginning, I think you can probably get some, at the very least, you would improve movement variability, and you would probably help your recovery at the very least.
Yeah.
And we'll see you about the rest. We're going to do some work on it.
Yeah.
We can play with it. Yeah.
We're making a program right now. Maybe we'll give it to everybody.
Yeah.
If you're still here, email us and we'll send you the program that we're working on.
I'd love to see this come up with.
Yeah. Zach, you want to just say, like, I know you have a bunch more of these seminars coming up. Like, you want to just throw out a couple, or where should they find you to check it out?
I mean,
you have a pretty original website name.
Yes, the website is my name, ZachCupples.com.
Spelled with ZAC, not
just C.
No H.
Yeah,
no H. No. I'm not a Zach. I'm not a Zach with a K. Like, no. But there's a reason for that. Did you know that my initials are ZAC? Zachary Alexander Cupples. So that's why I went with Zach.
If you ever forgot his first name, just remember his middle name and his last name.
Yeah. That guy. So ZachCupples.com. I'm on. That's where I would go. I mean, I do social media, but I'm also trying to be on that less.
Mm-hmm. And just like real quickly, who is this for? Who is the human matrix for? Is it just strength coaches? Is it PTs? Who could benefit from this thing?
Well, shit, man. After the past however many days we did human matrix, I say it's predominantly coaches who attend this. I also have some clinicians. I've had the gamut of everyone, but we had someone who is not in the field whatsoever.
Yeah, zero background, right?
Yeah, and her initial plan was to just see how it was going, and if it got too over her head, she was going to just step out during those times, and she stayed for the whole damn thing.
Yeah.
Which was really cool to see.
She got a lot out of it.
Yeah, which is cool. So I'd say if you are interested in maximizing your ability to move, and that can impact a lot of different areas. That can impact hypertrophy because you're going to alter how you're loading the system. That's going to impact power. That's going to impact rehab, sleep, anything. What I'm trying to do is take one concept, which is, if I boil down to it, which is teaching someone to maximize their movement in the ventral cavity, which is your thorax, abdomen, pelvis, and that occurs through stacking and applying that in as many different arenas as possible. That's really what it is. So if you are a coach, that's going to be beneficial to you. If you're a clinician, it's going to be beneficial to you. And if you're just someone who likes being in the weight room or not, if you're an athlete, that's going to be beneficial to you. So but I'd say the people who predominantly come to this are coaches, because I think I'm going to knock on my profession a little bit. I feel like coaches are people who are trying to be on the up and up on this stuff, especially from a movement perspective. I feel like in the PT realm, most people are looking for tool acquisition.
Yeah, where's the cold laser at, bro?
Yeah, or the needles or whatever.
Yeah.
Or
that's not necessarily all their fault, because people are coming to them for acute pain relief.
Yes,
Primarily.
but you can get acute pain relief with this stuff. Like that's
and you could probably be
let's not
chronic
open
pain
up the
relief.
pain work.
Yeah. It's all the different podcasts. But yeah, so I mean, if for anyone who's like serious about just their own training or like just feel
even
good,
just
like,
to see something different.
yeah,
like
I know, be challenged.
I know the first time I saw kind of these principles, it really was. It did, I wanted to leave the room. It was like a ton of confirmation bias, and I think if you're true to yourself and you really want to get better at your craft, you kind of walk into those how you feel. You walk into that, and you're either gonna come out like, yeah, that was bullshit, and that's fine, or you're gonna come out like, wow, that I can use some of that, and that's helpful, and now I know more that I don't know. And that's all. When I go to a seminar, honestly, like even if someone can give me like just one of those nuggets of something that I don't know and it sends me on a rabbit hole, like we were a training think tank and they were like, they just dropped, it was like a side sentence. They were like, well, Noah Olson is only like 10% body fat on a DEXA. And I was like, that makes no sense. This dude's got an 8-pack. And so this morning I was just looking at like intramuscular triglycerides and like how much room they can take up. And we don't know like how much room. So these guys could test that way on a DEXA, but they could have zero subcutaneous adipose tissue. They could just be using it as storage. So just like little stuff like that in passing, you're going to get, if you come to this seminar, you're going to get so many of those little moments where you're just going,
yeah, this is the second time I've taken it, and I've got to watch. I like it just like to think that you can go to a seminar once and learn everything that someone has learned in the 20 years of their career, like, is kind of asinine. Like, and, I really was reminded of that this past 5 days. So,
did you see a difference in terms of the way it was presented to?
Yeah,
I mean, I update this thing all the time.
Yeah, you're constantly updating. I mean, that's what I love. Like that, you're not afraid to go back and be like, hey, you know what? Like maybe I was either wrong or just not as right as I could have been, and let me correct that. Like, and because you're learning this stuff too. Like everyone's still like learning ways to get better, because there is so much garbage out there that we learned from the start that we have to kind of relearn the stuff. But yeah, it was just the way it was presented was just better. I think I was better equipped to learn this. Like, even though I've been going over your stuff for the last couple of years, like, it's just, I personally need to hear things very often. I think most people do. They just like to skip that part. They just think they can go to it once, or just read a blog post and like, I got it, figured it out. But no, I mean, this just opened my eyes to a lot of stuff, got us talking about a lot of things. Who you go to the seminar with is actually a really big deal too. Like, because it got like a lot of conversations going on that, so yeah, man, I think I really appreciate what you're doing. Like my thing is I want to be able to do this for the rest of my life. And I really think at the very least, this seminar is going to help me to do that. So thank you for all the work that you do. And I mean, it's great.
Well, I appreciate both of you for the discussions we've had over the last 6 days, just because, I mean, no one has ever talked about hypertrophy and applying this stuff in that realm to the extent that you two have. And I think it's really cool, and I'm excited to see
do that with
everyone. Well,
whatever anyone says, we're going to try to talk about it.
Yeah.
So if you want to talk to us about anything, we're gonna somehow manipulate that conversation into talking about hypertrophy.
You're gonna go to Seth Ober's class, and
for sure,
hypertrophy perspective.
For sure.
In
terms of trauma is probably helpful.
Would you want to give somebody trauma in the weight room? Like, did we end it? No.